Hi everyone. In this video I'll be doing something I've wanted to do for a while, which is foraging for a meal in the woods, and also with a bit of extra farm produce from my mom's farm in North Branch, Minnesota, which is about 45 minutes north of the Twin Cities. So the first thing I'm harvesting are chives. These were just growing. They're ready to be planted pretty soon. But there's some extras, so I'm going to be using these for my dish. So it's a bit of cheating, but I'm just going to use what I have here. So here I'm harvesting chives. I leave a bit of green growth so that they can grow back and be planted later. And the next plant you'll see is wild. It's considered a weed called lamb's quarters. And this is just growing kind of wildly, but in the greenhouse, so it's in a sense an accelerated spring in here, which kind of allows me to pick some stuff that wouldn't be around outside until a few weeks from now. And since this is considered a weed, I'm just cutting the whole plant off, because these beds are going to be planted with crops later. For my meal today, I'll be using lamb's quarters in a salad. Lamb's quarters is really nice and mild and has kind of a nutty flavor, which is really delicious. So here you can see me struggling through the swamp, and surrounding me are pretty much all cattails. You can see the little brush tips on them, and just all those stalks are cattails. So cattails are incredibly useful plant. You can use their stems, their roots, which are rhizomes, and also their shoots are edible. And so right now I'm just looking for kind of an upright stem because a lot of them are kind of knocked over. And no particular reason, but I figured that the upright ones are probably more likely to have good root systems. Here you'll see me trying to dig up the rhizome, which is the starchy edible part, kind of similar to potatoes in terms of like starch content. And so these are the main parts I'll be using as food. And then also, along with the rhizomes, there are little green shoots coming up for new plants. And these can be eaten kind of like asparagus almost. I'm just gonna saute them, and they're really good and tender. It kind of tastes like cucumbers, would be the best way to describe it. As you can probably see, digging up these rhizomes is pretty messy and pretty difficult too. They're really stuck in the mud, and they have these really extensive root systems. And here's a good example of the rhizomes, which kind of go out sideways from the main stalk. So the next step in preparing these is just washing them off, covered in mud. And then also I'm cutting off the kind of usable tubers, and also cutting off the shoots, which I'll cook separately. Here you can see the cattail shoots, which I'll saute, and then in this big pile are a bunch of cattail rhizomes, which I still need to peel because I don't want to use any of that orange kind of root mess. I just want the starch inside. And with cattails, you can eat the rhizome whole, but it's very fibrous and not the most pleasant to eat, so I'm going to try to separate the starch from the fiber by boiling and then processing through a mesh sieve. The last step before cooking these is to just cut them up once they're peeled, and I'll boil them before I extract the starch. On a slightly random side note, I thought it was a bit ironic that my meal that I had while I was foraging was an Indian frozen dinner from Trader Joe's. So here I'm getting ready to boil the cattail rhizome. I boiled it for about 20 minutes, which seemed sufficient to extract the starch. At the farm we keep honeybees. Right here is a leftover bee box from last year's hive. So there aren't any bees in it anymore, but there is some residual honey, which is still capped, so it's perfectly good. So I'm going to extract that to use as a bit of a dessert. I should note that given this is a small amount of honey, I'm using kind of an unusual method to get it. I'm just flipping it onto the top of a bin and then letting it drain onto it. Here you can see that the honey has drained onto the bin, and I'm going to scrape that up for use later. It might not have been the best idea to lick a knife, but it tasted just too good. Back to the cattails. They've been boiling for a while, so now it's time to take them out. And here I'm going to just pour them in a colander and then cut them up before mashing them. I realized later on that it's useful to cut them up into smaller pieces, which makes it easier to mash them, but this is before I discovered that. And the purpose of this mashing is to separate the fibers and the starch, and the fibers stay behind while the starch goes through the mesh to be collected. And so here's the starch. Here I'm taking advantage of the farm again. There's some spring garlic coming up, and so I just took one of those for my saute. I should also note that when foraging for wild plants, it's important to make sure you're not getting any lookalikes, so you don't poison yourself. Here I'm slicing up the cattail shoots for my saute. In addition to the foraged ingredients, I also brought up some olive oil, as well as some lemon and salt and pepper, which I use later on. In total, this stir fry consisted of some olive oil, garlic, the cattail shoots, salt, pepper, and then a squeeze of lemon. Here we have the processed cattail starch. I'm just going to heat this up and then add in some olive oil and salt and pepper, and then I'll eat that with the stir fry. The end result of the processed cattails was interesting. It was a bit like mashed potatoes, except a lot more gooey, and I think I like the texture of mashed potatoes more, but it was still surprisingly good. I think my favorite part of this dish was the stir fry. I think it had some of the best ingredients in terms of taste and texture, but the cattails were good as a just form of pure sustenance. I also made a simple salad with the lamb's quarters with a bit of olive oil and then salt and pepper and lemon. Here you can watch me struggle eating a salad with a spoon. The salad was really good though. More shots of me eating it with a spoon. I really like the combination of the cattails with the stir fry. I think they went together really well. In case you're wondering what happened to the honey, there was a bit of a malfunction and one of the videos was taken in slow motion, so I can't use it. What I ended up doing with the honey was I poured it over some more mashed cattails, and that was actually a really delicious dessert, kind of like a sweet porridge. While this video focuses a lot on the process of foraging, I think it's also important to reflect on the meaning of this exercise. Finding a meal from nature is a difficult task, especially in Minnesota in early spring. The environment forces you to keep an open mind, as there aren't too many options to choose from. Additionally, foraging is time-consuming. I think this meal took about half a day to prepare. This whole exercise made me appreciate the bounty of nature, but also its limitations. It made me grateful that there are grocery stores. Otherwise, I think we would all be spending the whole day looking for food.